Hey, Jen, want to talk about better pursuit?
Why do I always feel like I'm being hunted?
Great! Today we're going to discuss better ways to initiate emotional and sexual connection in your marriage. Let's do it. Welcome to the Intimate Covenant podcast, where we believe the Bible and great married sex both belong on your kitchen table. That's right, we're talking about holy, covenant-bound, intimate relationships with hot sex.
We're Matt and Jenn, founders of Intimate Covenant. We offer biblical teaching and resources to help married couples achieve a fuller relationship and an extraordinary sex life. For more information, visit our website, intimatecovenant.com.
Welcome, friends.
Welcome. Thanks for joining us.
Hey, Jen, how do you feel about date night?
I feel great about date night.
We're all dressed up for date night. If you're on the YouTube channel, you can see that we're looking good and ready to go out. But we have one more thing to complete.
That's right.
After a very busy weekend, one more thing to complete before we can get there. So
yes, so we're gonna nail this recording of the podcast quickly, so we can go enjoy date night.
One take, right?
One take. Here we go.
Speaking of our YouTube channel, like we mentioned last time, you can find us on YouTube. We've added a few new things to the channel, some old recordings, but as well as we're going to start putting our podcast on there.
That's right. So you can go over there and see our shining faces.
If you want to see how we look for date night tonight,
there you go.
Join us over there. So
there you go.
Also, maybe more important than date night coming up, we also have a couple of important events.
We do. We have Seattle coming in July and St. Louis coming in August. And we are super excited for both of those marriage days, marriage weekends.
Right.
So if you are in those areas, join us.
Yeah, you can go to intimatecovenant.com/live. That'll get you a listing of all of the upcoming local events. We certainly would love to see you in those places. But for those of you that have been anxiously awaiting, registration for the St. Louis event is now open.
All right.
So you can find it directly by going to intimatecovenant.com/STL.
STL. That'll do it. I feel like we're like using airport codes now.
Well, that or Major League Baseball codes is kind of where I was going. But,
I'm the one who's always buying the airplane tickets, so I think of the airlines.
That's right.
All right. So, Matt, today we're talking about pursuit. We're talking about ways that you can pursue well and maybe ways that you are doing it not so well.
There are certainly a lot of ways to pursue and initiate emotional or sexual connection poorly.
Right.
And I would guess that for a lot of couples, and maybe especially for younger couples, there are just a lot of missed connections.
That was the truth in our marriage, for sure. It took a little bit. You know, I mean, as a young couple, you're still learning how to communicate with one another. You're still learning, all the ins and outs of each other.
Well, and communication just in and of itself is complicated and it's nuanced.
Right.
And our spouse is not always hearing what we think we are saying.
Yes, we have expectations, but our spouse doesn't always know what those expectations are or how they can accommodate them. So we think we're communicating one thing, our spouse is hearing something else, and sometimes it just feels like we have all these places that we're missing one another.
Right, exactly. And if we have these missed connections for too long, then each spouse is interpreting those missed connections and interpreting their unmet expectations as rejection.
Right. Right.
And that perpetual rejection, even if it's unintentional, that perpetual sense of rejection soon turns to resentment.
Right. Both spouses then take that and they stop, trying to initiate because it hurts. Like, I put myself out there. I show that I want something. My spouse doesn't even acknowledge that, and that hurts. And so I stop even trying. And we can get into a pretty toxic cycle pretty quickly.
Yeah, of that pursuit and that sense of rejection. And again, even if it's unintentional rejection, but that quickly turns into a toxic cycle, like Jen is saying. But what is needed in these situations is not less desire. It's not like deciding that, well, I guess my needs aren't that important, so I should stop wanting this.
I should stop wanting sex. I should stop wanting to talk to my spouse,
Yeah.
right? That's not the answer.
That's not the answer. It's also not the answer to have less pursuit. It's not that you need to stop asking. Usually what's helpful in these situations is not less pursuit, but better pursuit.
Right.
Clear communication and appealing invitations to that pursuit. So,
So we're going to tell everybody how to do that perfectly today, right, Matt?
well, we're going to at least try to give you some guidelines, maybe some things to think about in how you are pursuing, and maybe how to make that turn out a little bit better, and to at least be able to better communicate what it is that you're looking for.
Right.
Now, just like there are lots of poor ways to handle pursuit and initiation, there are also lots of terrible ways to handle your finances.
Ah, that's true. And that is why we are so grateful to have Open Door Financial Advisors, opendoorfa.com.
Yes, so we are grateful, so grateful for the personal attention and for the expert advice that we get from Derek Finley with Open Door Financial Advisors. We meet regularly with Derek, and we know that our unique needs, even personally, our unique needs with it as it pertains to intimate covenant and how we are handling that, our unique circumstances, we know that our unique needs are being heard.
Right. And that our circumstances are what helps Derek determine like the advice that he's going to give us. He's able to adjust, our plans along with us and help us keep our goals and our dreams on track.
Yeah. And one way that Open Door is different, at least that we have found in working with other financial advisors, is that they're not trying to sell me anything.
Yeah.
He's not trying to sell me life insurance or loans or investments or any other products. There's no hidden agenda. There's no sales pitch, because Open Door simply charges a monthly subscription for solid, personal expert advice.
Yeah. And so, when we have come up as we're evaluating, our whole financial plan and everything like that, anytime we've come up to a place where, okay, we need insurance or we need another place of investment or any other product, Derek then will let us know how to make the right decision. He's there to guide that. But we know that advice is all about what's best for us.
Right, exactly. So we personally and strongly recommend Open Door Financial Advisors, opendoorfa.com, where finances meet faith and family.
Love it. We're also very thankful for Open Door sponsorship of this podcast.
Yes.
Because it's given us a lot of opportunities.
Yeah, as an aside, one of the recent benefits of Open Door's sponsorship, and combined with, in addition to our Patreon supporters,
that's right.
We now have added transcripts to all new and upcoming episodes.
Yeah.
So starting with this last episode and including this one, we're going to have transcripts available for every upcoming episode. The translation is not perfect yet. We acknowledge that.
I'm working to find time in my week where I will be able to sit down and listen to it and go through it. But regardless, it's there. It's at least a place where if you want to know what we're saying, if you want to look at it in writing, you can do that now,
Yes.
thanks to the financial support of Patreon and Open Door.
If you need to see what we're saying in writing, check out the show notes. You'll get a link to where you can find those transcripts, or just email us. We'll be happy to forward the transcripts to you. Our goal is to eventually get all the transcripts for all the shows for every episode, but this is a good start, and we're very excited about that. And again, we're grateful to Open Door Financial Advisors and to our Patreon subscribers for giving us the resources to be able to do that.
Yeah, makes it feel a little bit more like, you have to hold us to our word now because you can see it in writing.
That's right. So before we resume this discussion about better pursuit and initiation, Jen, I think it's crucial to recognize that all pursuit must be filtered first through the lens of serving our spouse.
Absolutely. I mean, and I think that if you've listened to us for any amount of time, you know that where we first start is how do we love our spouse in a Christ-like way? How do we love with the Ephesians 5 love of sacrificial love?
Right.
And so I think absolutely we have to first consider, what does my spouse need or desire?
Sure. And or does their need or desire conflict with my current needs and desires?
Right.
And if so, how can I serve what they need so that they might be in a better place to serve what I need?
Right. Like, for example, if I'm an emotional pursuer, hi, I'm Jen. I'm an emotional pursuer. Do you think I was going to high five you? Let's high five.
High five.
There you go. If I'm an emotional pursuer and I'm in the mood for a nice, long, intimate conversation, but say my spouse is watching his favorite baseball team and it's the bottom of the ninth with the bases loaded in the World Series, probably not a good time for an intimate conversation, right?
Right. Or if I'm a physical pursuer and I'm in the mood for some prolonged sexual encounter, but my spouse has only gotten 4 hours of interrupted sleep in the past week, maybe that's not the best time to try to put on my best moves.
Yeah, probably not going to be hours upon hours.
Right. So
Exactly.
it doesn't, and the point I think is we're going to talk about ways to pursue, again, whether you're pursuing emotionally or sexually, ways to pursue that are better, that might be better received, that might better communicate what you're looking for. But it doesn't matter in some cases how well you phrase it.
Right.
You're setting yourself up with if you're setting yourself up with unrealistic expectations, you're ultimately going to be disappointed if you can't see past your own self. If you can't see past your own nose,
Right.
You're going to be disappointed if you have unrealistic expectations.
Right. And so we're starting this episode with, we want to discuss how can we all pursue one another better? How can we initiate better? But it has to first start with, I have a sacrificial, loving heart that says first, what is it that my spouse needs?
Right.
And then that puts me in a place where I'm not coming at this from a place of demand.
Right.
And I think that's an important place to start. Because poor pursuit and poor initiation, like we kind of started with, that often results in rejection, whether that's intentional or unintentional.
Absolutely. And so, today's episode, we're talking about not just the sexual nature of your relationship, but we're talking about pursuing, again, whether it's sexually or emotionally, however it is that you pursue in your relationship. And so we want to give advice to both pursuers and responders, but
Right.
in particular, we're giving advice to emotional pursuers, and we're giving advice to sexual pursuers because no matter what you're pursuing, that method, your methods of pursuit and how you're communicating that are often very similar. It doesn't matter what you're actually pursuing.
Right. I think, we often, we use that pursuer responder language, but a lot of times, because this podcast tends to often be very sexually focused or focused on our sexual relationship, we may not always apply the things that we're saying about pursuers to, say, those of us that are emotional pursuers or vice versa. And so, today especially, we want you to first start listening to this by considering, what realm are you playing in your relationship? And really just focusing mostly on in your the emotional realm of your relationship and the physical. What role do you play? Are you the pursuer? Are you the responder? And then listen to today's episode with that in mind, so that you can kind of, better your initiation and pursuit, no matter what realm of intimacy we're talking about.
The goal is, no matter what you're looking for, is to make your pursuit and to make your invitation more appealing.
Right.
And that just helps everybody in the long run. So let's talk about this maybe from a backwards perspective, and that is to think about like what makes for poor pursuit, what makes for poor initiation.
Yeah.
And I think that we could maybe sum that up into one word, and that is pressure.
Right.
If your responder feels like you are pressuring them, and that is your method of pursuit, then their response is going to be negative.
Right.
They're not going to be interested in coming alongside if they feel like they're being pressured. And so what does pressure look like? Well, I mean, pressure comes in lots of different forms.
Right.
One important and maybe the most profoundly negative way to motivate someone is with shame
Yeah.
and or criticism.
Right, right. And we all know what that feels like to be, to have our spouse shame us for who we are, or to have our spouse criticize the way that we are responding. I mean, very few of us would say, "Yeah, that feels great. I feel really motivated when they do that," And I think we all innately know this, right? That criticism doesn't actually ever really get us what we want. And yet, when we're in a place of pursuit and we're feeling that sense of, I'm not being heard, I'm not, my needs, my desires aren't being acknowledged, we tend to often result to this place of pressure, and especially this place of like using the shame and the criticism. And
oh yeah, and sometimes
that tears your spouse down fast.
Absolutely. Sometimes that looks like comparison, like I've done all these things and you don't ever do anything, or even sometimes maybe even worse is this person over there is so good about doing these things.
Why aren't you like that?
Why aren't you more like them?
Yeah.
We all. I mean, you just cringe when you think about those things. But we're all often, sometimes guilty of using those methods sometimes just out of desperation, but using those methods to try to motivate our spouse more towards what we want how we want them to treat us or behave.
Yeah,
it just doesn't work though.
It doesn't work, but I think, I mean, those are kind of big. Like, it's probably not too difficult to think about the times that you've used shame and criticism or just these negative places of comparison. But I think negative elements are also a little bit more subtle.
Yes.
Like, we say things like, well, I don't like it when you do this.
Right. Or can you please stop XYZ? Or you're really bad at this thing.
Right. And we think, okay, well, I am expressing myself to my spouse, but that is coming at it from a negative place, which will then be pressure.
Right. And sometimes your motivation there is appropriate. I mean, you're trying to explain to your spouse, I don't like this, but what I really like is this other thing. And so you're trying to move them from one thing to the other, whatever that might be. But I'll just say that if you can avoid even bringing up those negative elements, your spouse will hear you so much better, because any kind of criticism, your responder is only going to hear the negative elements. They're only going to hear, I don't like this, please stop this, you're really bad at this, and they're going to be reeling from that criticism and they're turning off their engagement mode and turning up the defenses because they're hearing criticism. They're not hearing what it is that you'd like them to do in a positive way.
Right. Responders are definitely going to then become withdrawers, because that's how they respond to that place of pressure. So just learning to be very aware of the language that we choose,
right?
I think is so important, and taking out that negative.
Yeah. So instead of dwelling on the bad or dwelling on the behavior that you're trying to correct, or dwelling on the negative parts of what your spouse is doing, just leave that out as much as it is possible. Leave that out and just simply ask them or invite them to something that is better, and explain how much you enjoy when they do this, or how much you would enjoy or how much you would mean to you for them to do this other thing. So that's what we mean by avoid these negative elements, avoid criticism, avoid the negativity. I think another place, though, where sometimes our initiation, again, although probably well-intentioned, has a tendency to immediately turn off our responders. And that is when we approach things with this high energy. Like, there's this thing that I want to do, or there's this conversation I want to have, or there's this place I want to take you, And I'm so excited about it because I know it's going to be so great for me. It's going to be so great for our relationship. It's going to be so great
You're
for
gonna
everything.
love it.
You're going to love this if you just, and we come at it with such high intensity and such high energy.
And all of us who are responders in any realm of our relationship know that what's a responder's reaction to that?
Run and hide.
Whoa,
Yes.
and there's always going to be for a responder when met with that super high energy, this place of heightened anxiety and suspicion.
Yeah, exactly.
And
The
like,
suspicion, for
why are you so, heightened about
Yes,
this?
and what are they about to ask me to do? Because it's probably going to be crazy because they're so excited about this thing.
Right.
And yes, I hope that if you're a pursuer, you are excited about things that could make your relationship better, sexually, emotionally, or otherwise.
Sure.
But it is unreasonable to expect that your spouse is going to be excited as you are about any
Well,
of these things.
I think that's really getting to the underline of it, is that as pursuers, we often think that our level of excitement should be what our spouse's level of excitement is. And that if we will just show our spouse this level of excitement, then surely they will rise to the occasion and have the exact same level of excitement as we have.
And I would just caution you, pursuers, that until your spouse is warmed up to the idea, they're just going to innately be suspicious of your motives. Like, why are they so excited about this? Why is there such high energy about this? And what is this going to be required of me? And that's especially going to be true if you have used pressure or coercion as a persuasive tool in the past.
Right. And so, yes, we want you to share your whole self with your spouse. So we're not saying, hide your level of excitement, but just recognize that the best pursuit is you may actually temper your excitement a little bit in order to not put your responder on edge, right? Your job as a pursuer is to provide security for your responder. And sometimes that means chill out a little
Just
bit.
dial it down. You need to express all of your feelings about this, but dial it down and don't overwhelm your responder with that kind of energy.
Right. Okay, so we started with kind of the negative, right?
Well, okay. But in the same way, though, the best initiation, the best kind of pursuit is an invitation.
Yes.
It's not expressing a need.
And I love this, just using the two words initiation and invitation, because to me this is the how do we really do this? How do we do this well? And if you can connect in your mind that the best initiation is actually an invitation, that is different.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, when you say to your spouse, again, whether that's with your tone, whether that's with your actual words or your actions, when you're saying to your spouse that I need something, you are presenting the very worst part of yourself to your spouse.
Yeah, you're becoming a chore rather than a refreshment, right? If you are a physical pursuer and you treat your, desire for physical intimacy as I have a need that your body has to fulfill, you've become an item on the to-do list.
Precisely. So rather than trying to push or pull your responder away from old behaviors and old patterns by using criticism and shame, the goal here is to invite them by speaking positively about the behaviors that you enjoy or desire.
Right.
Keep your tone low, but mostly be able to express to your spouse what it would mean to you.
This to me is the key, because when you start from a place of I desire this and this is what it would mean to me, that's an invitation. That's not pressure.
Right.
That's an invitation.
And that's different. You might be asking for the same things, but if you're presenting it to your spouse as I need this, then all they can hear is this is going to require something of me.
Right.
If you instead present it from the standpoint of this is what we can do to build our relationship, this is what it would mean to me. This is how it would help me feel. These are all the ways in which it would enrich our relationship. Then you can present that as instead as not something that just requires something from your responder. Instead, you're inviting them to something that they can help co-create.
Right. And even taking that a step further and acknowledging what you do have first. We have this. We talk all the time. We have a great emotional connection with one another. What if we added this in?
Yes.
So then you're coming at that from we have a common bond already. That is a beautiful place.
Yeah. And that's
we can build together.
Yes.
That becomes not me versus you, but we.
Yes. And that's where a lot of the relationship experts talk about approaching life and your relationships from a place of fullness rather than a place of emptiness.
Right.
And I think that's important even in our relationship with God and our relationships with a lot of other folks, even our approach to life. If we're constantly looking at life and thinking, well, I need this or I want something else, that is an unhealthy place to be spiritually, emotionally, in every other sense.
Yeah.
Rather than approaching life from, I have these things for which I am grateful, and I only want to improve things for the betterment of all of those around me. That is a place of fullness where I have everything that I need. I just want to make things better and to make others better because of my fullness.
And that might take a lot of work, right? Like switching your mindset to a mindset of gratitude.
That's where it starts.
That's powerful.
Gratitude is everything. It is where it starts. It must be foundational in your relationship with God, and it is crucial in your relationship with your spouse. If you're not approaching your relationship from a place of gratitude, you're really missing the fullness of what could be.
Right. And so I think, when you have that place of gratitude, when you're able to express that with your spouse, then you're looking for, like you said, the fullness of what our relationship could be. You're not coming at this from a place of, here's all the ways that our relationship is wrong.
Or maybe how your responder's hearing it is, here's all the places where you are wrong.
Right.
And you're the problem, so you need to change. Your responder's never going to hear anything that you're saying after that statement, right?
Right.
So another place I think where you can create an invitation rather than a place of need is to express to your spouse openness to co-create this experience.
Right.
If your request feels one-sided, in other words, if the request feels like I'm just asking for all of these things for myself and I just need you to do all these things for me, then your responder is going to run and hide.
Right.
Instead, they must feel like they are being seen and heard in this process.
They need to feel like they're a part of the process.
Yes.
And that you value their perspective as much as or more than your own.
Right. They need to hear that they're not being invited just to serve me.
Right.
They need to feel like they're being invited to co-create something with me.
Right. So when you come to your responder with a desire for more connection emotionally or physically, a desire for different connections or, emotionally or physically, when you come to them with expressing your desire in an inviting way, and you make a statement like, what would you like to add to that? Man, that changes everything, because that's, again, it's not a place of pressure. It's a place of invitation.
Yeah, or what do you think? What do you think about this idea? Or what would make that experience better for you? Or what have I forgotten in this plan? Or
how would you like to connect?
Sure.
Now, responders are going to respond first with, I don't know. Because that's what responders do, right?
That's right.
Because even if you're inviting, your responder needs your responder needs that space to respond. So even within, like you're doing it all perfectly right, just recognize that the first question, or when you ask that question, the first thing out of your responder's mouth is going to be probably some sort of I don't know. I need to think about that. Okay. But if you are not coming at them from a place of pressure, you've opened them up to be able to respond.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's the goal, is to create a dynamic where there is pursuit and response. Give them space to respond.
Right.
I think that's a good way to put that.
Right.
Another tip, pursuers, again, whether you're pursuing emotionally or sexually or whatever else you're pursuing, you need to be very specific with your invitation.
I think this is where a lot of us don't do so well. I think many spouses complain that they initiate frequently, but their spouse just constantly rejects them. And this might be true, but I think in many cases, maybe even most cases, your invitations aren't being heard as invitations.
Right.
You're not actually saying what you think you are saying. Because a lot of us, and again, this gets back to rejection,
Sure.
right? It's kind of our innate response of rejection hurts, so I want to hedge myself to try and prevent rejection.
Yeah.
So often we develop ways to avoid actually saying what we mean.
Yep.
We think that's going to make it a little bit better, and it actually makes it worse. So just stop it now. And so let's kind of go through some examples of what does that look like? What does that sound like?
Okay, well, let's say your spouse is on their way home from work, and you send them a text message that says, "Be sure to get in the shower when you get home."
Okay.
Now, what you meant to say, perhaps, is, "I want to have sex with you with your clean body tonight." Or you might have meant, "I want to join you in the shower, so be sure to get in the shower when you get home."
Yeah, but what they heard was maybe, "You smell so bad, I don't want to be around you."
Right.
Right.
So you said something that you thought was sexy, you thought was an invitation. Instead, your spouse is interpreting it entirely differently because you are not being specific enough.
Right. Or what about when you say, "Hey, let's cuddle tonight"? What you maybe meant was, "Let's cuddle, period."
Period.
Maybe you're meaning that statement as, "That's it." But maybe they heard something differently, right? "Let's cuddle tonight" could be what?
Yeah, your spouse might have heard, "Let's get warmed up with cuddling on the couch so that we can better enjoy our sex in the bedroom."
And maybe that's what you meant, but they heard, "Let's cuddle, period."
Right. So again, be specific and make sure that your spouse is understanding what you're asking for.
Right. What about when you say, "Well, are you about finished with your video game or the sports game on TV or your book or social media or whatever it is? Are you about finished with that?" What you maybe meant was, "I'd really like to spend some time with you." Or maybe you mean, "I'd like to have sex."
Right. Instead, what your spouse may have heard was, "You're wasting time. You should be doing something else." Or, I want to interrupt your quiet time because I need something from you." Right? You're trying to initiate something with this question, "Are you finished with your video game or book or whatever it is?" And you may mean something entirely different than what your spouse is interpreting, again, because your invitation is not being specific.
Right.
What if, or sometimes we don't even make an invitation. What if you said nothing? You just moved in with a kiss and a handsy embrace.
Right. And so what you might have meant was, "I love you and I just want to cover your body in all sorts of affection and love." But maybe what they heard was, "All he ever thinks about is sex." Or, "Can't he see how busy I am here? This is not a great time for interruption."
Yeah, or you might have even responded by engaging in that kiss and handsy embrace, and you might have thought, "Oh, that was nice."
Just a lovely little interruption there.
But you had no clue that that was an invitation to something further.
Yes.
So again,
And I hope you all can put yourself into these simple little scenarios and statements, because we all do this. We all make these simple little statements and we pack them full of meaning, but we're not willing to express it. And our spouse is left going, do they mean this? Do they mean that? I have to guess. And it feels like 9 times out of 10, I guess wrong, right, and somebody's hurt, and I don't even know why they're hurt.
Exactly. So be specific with your invitations. Mm-hmm. Make sure that you and your spouse are on the same page. Don't try to speak in code language.
Yeah.
Don't make invitations that could be interpreted in many different ways.
Yeah.
Make sure that you and your spouse are speaking the same language.
Right. If you want to say, hey, let's cuddle tonight, great, say that and follow it with, because I'd like to start warming up here and then move on. Or follow it with, let's cuddle tonight, but tomorrow night, let's be all in. Let's do these things mm-hmm. throughout the day to make it to where tomorrow night can be an amazing experience. You see how that then puts both of you on a page of a clearly understand what my spouse is looking for, right. But it's also an invitation because you're also saying, this is where I'm at. Where are you in this?
Yeah, and there's nothing wrong with having code language. Like sometimes a couple may have already attached meaning to this
sure.
phrase cuddle tonight. Like if you are in the habit of saying let's cuddle tonight and you both know and understand that means that you're having sex tonight, great. Use the code language. Just make sure that your spouse has the same decoder ring so that they know what you're talking about. But guess what? In order to develop a code language, you have to have conversations about this.
Oh, here we go.
Yes.
You have to communicate.
You've got to communicate about it, and you're
right.
going to have to be open and honest with what you mean.
Say what you actually mean to one another.
Now, great. So, Matt and Jen, you've done great. You've told us all of these great tips on how to communicate better and to initiate and pursue better. But what if my spouse still won't hear me?
Right. We get that. I think that's a kind of a place where a lot of people who email us are coming from. Mm-hmm. I'm trying, my spouse won't hear me. And obviously there's no magic spell that we can wave a wand right. over our spouse and get them to hear, get them to respond in a way that we want them to respond. I mean, there are no guidelines to do a better job at communicating when you want what you want in a way that your spouse may be more receptive.
There's no magic wand here. Mm-hmm. There's no magic words, but there's no amount of sugarcoating though that will make an unrealistic request more appealing.
Yeah.
So it is on you as a pursuer to stop being selfish and to stop being self-serving and to acknowledge that even if that's not how you're behaving today, if that's been your past, it takes some time to rebuild that trust. Yeah. And you've got to then keep pursuing in a way that is selfless and in a way that is more noble.
Right. And I think that goes back to our very beginning, right? Where does this start? It first starts with loving in a sacrificial way. And so if your love has come across a whole lot more like pressure mm-hmm. than sacrifice, you have some rebuilding to do. So it is on you to stop being selfish.
Even if that's been unintentional in the way that you've been
right.
pursuing, you still need to acknowledge those places where maybe that's been your approach in the past.
Right.
Now, of course, it is also possible that your spouse is just selfish and self-serving, and that they are entirely unwilling to hear your requests, regardless of how well you are communicating.
Yeah.
I get it, and if that's your situation, we are truly sorry. Mm-hmm. And we pray that your spouse will eventually be willing to change their heart. But you still have a responsibility to be serving and self-sacrificial.
Right.
The more amenable you are to hearing and serving your spouse, the more likely it is that they will be willing to hear you.
Right. And you can't change your spouse, but you can change you. And I think that's the advice we give all the time. It's not that there is nothing I can do to make my marriage better. There is always something you can do to make your marriage better because you can always make you
Absolutely.
better.
Absolutely. Esther Perel says, when I'm not being heard, it's because I'm not listening. I think it's just so profound that often we think to be heard, we need to be louder, we need to be stronger, we need to be more persuasive. In reality, often we're not being heard because we're not willing to listen to other people.
Yeah. Your spouse may not be willing to hear you because they have completely shut down because of your pressure.
Yeah,
and that
absolutely.
might be a painful place that you have to recognize. And so we're encouraging you as a whole, turn your initiation into invitation, and do that regardless, frankly, of how your spouse does or doesn't react, because that makes you a better spouse. And ultimately, that's what it's all about.
Right.
All right, Matt, give us our wrap up.
Poor pursuit and poor initiation result in missed connection and rejection, whether that's intentional or unintentional. Pursuit should not include criticism, shame, or other forms of pressure. Instead, offer an appeal for connection and an invitation to connection. Be specific with your invitation to avoid miscommunications and hidden expectations.
Now it's time to grab your spouse and your Bible and head to your kitchen table to have the conversation about better pursuit. Discuss some times when you thought you were initiating connection, but your spouse never ever seemed to acknowledge it.
We would love to hear your feedback. Contact us by emailing podcast@intimatecovenant.com, or to submit anonymous feedback and questions, go to intimatecovenant.com/podcast and click the button Contact the Podcast for an anonymous submission form. Thanks again to Derek and Open Door Financial Advisors for sponsoring the podcast. Contact Open Door at opendoorfa.com.
Thanks to all of you for listening, subscribing, rating, and sharing the podcast. We're truly humbled by all your encouragement and support. Thanks especially to our Patreon subscribers for coming alongside us in a very real and genuine way. We love you. If you would like to join Intimate Covenant by supporting the podcast and our greater mission to share God's plan for intimate marriage and holy sexuality, subscribe at patreon.com/intimatecovenant.
Until next time, keep striving and don't settle.